There's something about an empty house that speaks louder than words, the kind of silence that makes you wonder who walked out the door and never came back. When Raina Cole won an abandoned mountain ranch at a county auction, she thought she'd found peace. The property sat empty for 7 years. 2 houses, a barn, 300 acres nobody wanted. Locals called it cursed. An old farmhand named Deke Harlow told her on arrival, "They never found the bodies." She thought it was just talk to scare outsiders. Then on her 3rd night, she found fresh boot prints leading to the cellar she'd locked. An old photograph appeared on the porch with faces scratched out. The windmill turned in still air, creaking like it wanted to tell her something. What happened? Here 7 years ago? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story pulls you in, subscribe. Tomorrow brings something you won't want to miss. 3 days earlier, Raina Cole had driven up the winding mountain road with everything she owned, packed in the bed of her old Ford pickup. The truck's engine labored on the steep grade, complaining in that familiar way that meant she'd need to check the oil soon. She didn't mind. The sound was honest, straightforward, something she'd learned to appreciate after years of people who weren't either of those things. The road to the ranch cut through dense stands of pine and Douglas fir, trees that had stood for 100 years or more. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dusty shafts, and the air smelled of resin and earth. It was the kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts, where the quiet wasn't empty, but full of the small sounds that cities drown out. A hawk's cry, wind through branches, the distant rush of creek water over stone. She'd spent the last 8 years moving from town to town, taking odd jobs and never staying long enough to form attachments. After her husband died, a sudden heart attack at 47 that left her with questions she'd never get to ask. She'd found she couldn't stay in one place. The house they'd shared became a museum of might-have-beens. Every room held conversations they'd never finish, plans they'd never complete. So she'd sold it, packed light, and started walking. Not literally walking, though there'd been stretches where she'd done that too. But walking in the sense of moving forward without looking back, of putting miles between herself and the weight of memory. She'd worked as a cook in Montana, a bookkeeper in Idaho, a ranch hand in Wyoming. Everywhere she went, people called her that woman with the pack, the one who kept to herself, who worked hard and asked for nothing, who disappeared when the season changed. But she was tired now. Tired of temporary rooms and borrowed spaces, tired of waking up and needing a moment to remember which town she was in. When she'd seen the auction notice posted in the general store in Timber Falls, something had shifted in her chest. 300 acres, 2 houses, water rights, starting bid so low it seemed like a mistake. She'd done her research, of course. The property had sat abandoned for 7 years. Previous owners had vanished without a trace, both families gone within days of each other. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, just empty houses and unanswered questions. The county had finally moved to auction it for back taxes after years of legal limbo. Most people would have been spooked by that history. Raina had been intrigued. She'd lived long enough to know that houses didn't become haunted by ghosts. They became haunted by the stories people told about them, by fear and superstition and the human tendency to see patterns where none existed. And if the stories kept other bidders away, well, that worked in her favor. She'd been the only one at the auction who raised her hand. The ranch revealed itself gradually as the road climbed. First the lower pastures, overgrown with wild grass that moved like water in the breeze. Then the barn, red paint weathered to rust and grey, its roof sagging but still intact. Finally, the houses. 2 of them, just as the listing had said. The main house stood proud on a small rise, a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and gabled windows that looked out over the valley. White paint peeled in long strips, and several shutters hung crooked, but the bones looked solid. The second house sat 100 yards away, smaller, a simple ranch-style structure with a covered porch and stone chimney. Raina cut the engine and sat for a moment, taking it in. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like breathing. The rusted windmill turned slowly, creaking with each revolution. And everywhere there was that quality of abandonment, not the violent abandonment of disaster, but the eerie abandonment of interruption, as if the people who'd lived here had simply stepped outside one morning and never came back. She climbed out of the truck, boots crunching on gravel. The air was cooler up here, carrying the bite of altitude. Early September, and already she could feel autumn pressing in. The sun hung low, painting everything gold and amber. The auction deed was in her jacket pocket, the paper already creased from handling. She pulled it out and unfolded it, reading it again even though she'd memorized the words. Legal description of the property, transfer of ownership, signed and stamped by the county clerk. But it was the handwritten notes in the margins that kept drawing her eye. Small, cramped writing that didn't match the clerk's signature. Ask about the cellar. Water rights disputed. Check boundary markers. As if someone had tried to leave warnings for the next owner, she'd asked the clerk about them when she'd picked up the deed. The woman had looked at the notes, frowned, and said she didn't know anything about them. The previous clerk had retired 2 years ago, moved to Arizona. These must have been her additions. Raina folded the deed and pocketed it. She'd figure it out. She was good at figuring things out. The main house's front door was unlocked, not just unlocked, unlatched, as if someone had closed it carelessly on their way out. It swung open with a push, hinges shrieking in protest. Inside, the air was stale and cool, carrying the smell of dust and old wood and something else she couldn't quite place. Not decay exactly, more like absence. The interior stopped her in her tracks. She'd expected empty rooms, bare walls, the hollow echo of abandonment. Instead, she found a house that looked lived in. Furniture arranged in the front room, a sofa, and 2 chairs around a coffee table, a bookshelf lined with volumes, a braided rug on the hardwood floor. In the kitchen, dishes in the cabinets, canned goods in the pantry, labels faded but still readable. Upstairs, beds made with quilts pulled tight, clothes in the closets, shoes lined up underneath. It was as if the owners had planned to return any moment. Raina moved through the rooms slowly, cataloguing everything. Men's and women's clothing, children's toys in one bedroom, plastic figures and picture books, photographs on the mantel showing a family of 4, mother, father, 2 boys. They smiled. Out at her from behind dusty glass, frozen in happier times. The second house was the same. Different family, different belongings, but the same sense of interrupted life. This family had been older. No children's items, but the personal effects of a couple in their 60s. Reading glasses on a side table. Medications in the bathroom cabinet. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the dining room table. By the time the sun began to set, Raina had explored both houses and the barn. The barn held equipment, tools, and evidence of livestock that were long gone. Everything covered in years of dust and bird droppings, but still present, still waiting. She made camp that first night in the main house, rolling out her sleeping bag on the sofa rather than claiming one of the bedrooms. It felt presumptuous. Somehow sleeping in a bed that still belonged, in some fundamental way, to people who might never return. She ate cold beans from a can and watched through the window as darkness filled the valley. That's when she saw the light. Just for a moment, a flicker in the window of the second house. Quick enough that she might have imagined it, but her gut said otherwise. She grabbed her flashlight and crossed the distance between the houses at a steady pace, not running, but not dawdling either. The second house was dark when she reached it, door closed tight. She tried the handle, locked. She'd left it unlocked. Raina stood on the porch, listening. The wind moved through the eaves. The windmill creaked its endless rotation, nothing else. But the skin between her shoulder blades prickled with awareness, that old animal sense that said she wasn't alone. She went back to the main house and pushed a chair under the doorknob before climbing into her sleeping bag. Sleep came eventually, but it was thin and restless. The next morning, she drove into Timber Falls, the nearest town. It was small, a main street with a dozen businesses, a gas station, a diner, and a general store that seemed to serve as the town's social hub. Population couldn't have been more than 200, and most of those probably lived on ranches scattered through the surrounding mountains. The general store's bell chimed as she entered. A woman behind the counter looked up, and Raina saw recognition flash across her face. News traveled fast in small towns. "You're the one who bought the old place," the woman said. "Not a question. Raina Cole." She offered her hand. The woman took it after a moment's hesitation. "Lily Chen. My family's run this store for 30 years. She was somewhere in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Takes some nerve, moving into that property alone. I've lived in worse places. Maybe, but those places probably didn't have the history that one does." Lily leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know about the families?" "I know they disappeared. 7 years ago, the Torrances and the Bishops." Lily said the names like a prayer for the dead. Good people. The Torrances had moved up from California a few years before. Marcus and Julie, 2 boys. The Bishops were old ranch family, Dennis and Violet. They'd been here 40 years. What happened to them? Lily shook her head. "Nobody knows. Marcus Torrance missed a meeting with his bank. Dennis Bishop didn't show up for Sunday service. When folks went to check, both houses were empty. Cars still there. Belongings untouched. Like they'd been raptured up to heaven. Except nobody believes in that around here. The sheriff investigated." Something flickered across Lily's face. Sheriff Moss did what he could. Search parties combed the property and the surrounding forest. Brought in dogs, helicopters, the whole works. Never found a trace. After 6 months, they called it off. Presumed dead. No bodies recovered. Raina bought supplies, coffee, bread, eggs, bacon. As Lily rang her up, an old man shuffled in from the back room. He wore overalls and a faded cap, face weathered like old leather. "This is my uncle," Lily said. Deke Harlow, the name clicked. The man from the auction, the one who'd warned her. Deke studied her with pale blue eyes. "You settling in all right?" "Getting there. Place needs work. I used to maintain the equipment for the Bishops. Could help you out if you need it. I might take you up on that," he nodded slowly. "Just be careful. That land, it holds on to things. Secrets have a way of not staying buried out there." Raina met his gaze. "I'm not afraid of secrets. Maybe you should be." But there was no malice in his words, only a deep, abiding sadness. She drove back to the ranch with the supplies and spent the afternoon making the main house habitable. She cleared out the family's personal belongings with care, boxing them up and storing them in the barn. It felt like trespassing, but she couldn't live surrounded by someone else's life. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains purple and gold, she sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the windmill turn. The valley spread out below, a patchwork of forest and meadow. Beautiful country, peaceful, but peace could be deceptive. She'd learned that the hard way. The wind picked up as darkness fell, and with it came that feeling again, the sensation of being watched. She scanned the tree line, the barn, the second house. Nothing moved. But the feeling persisted, raising goosebumps on her arms. Inside, she locked the doors and checked the windows. Then she sat at the kitchen table and spread out the deed again, studying those handwritten warnings. Ask about the cellar. She hadn't been in the cellar yet. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow, she'd explore every corner of this place, and maybe then she'd understand what had happened here. Outside, the windmill creaked and groaned, its blades catching the wind. And somewhere in the darkness, something waited. Raina woke to the sound of metal scraping against wood. She was upright before her eyes were fully open, heart hammering. The house was dark, except for the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. She checked her phone, 3:17 in the morning. The scraping came again, and this time she placed it. The cellar door. She'd bolted it yesterday after a cursory inspection, not liking the look of the steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. The bolt was solid iron, old but sturdy. It shouldn't have been making any noise at all. Raina pulled on her jeans and grabbed the flashlight she kept by the sofa. Her grandfather's revolver was in her pack. She retrieved it, checked the cylinder, and moved toward the kitchen where the cellar door was located. The bolt was drawn back. The door stood open a few inches. She was certain, absolutely certain, she'd secured it. She remembered the resistance as she'd slid the bolt home, the metallic click as it seated. Someone had opened this door from the inside or the outside, and either possibility made her skin crawl. She stood there in the darkness, weighing her options. Call someone, but who? Sheriff Moss, who she'd only heard about secondhand. Deke, who'd as much as told her the place was cursed. Or she could wait until morning, pretend she hadn't heard anything, and live with the wondering. That wasn't her way. Raina pulled the door fully open and shone her light down the stairs. The beam cut through cobwebs and dust motes, illuminating rough wooden steps that descended into a space that smelled of earth and stone and stagnant water. No movement, no sound except the house settling around her. She went down carefully, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The stairs creaked but held. At the bottom, her light revealed a cellar much larger than she'd expected, maybe 40 feet across, with stone walls and a dirt floor. Support beams held up the floor joists above. Shelves lined one wall, holding mason jars with contents long since spoiled. An old workbench sat against another wall, and in the far corner she found the source of the night's disturbance. A section of the dirt floor had been disturbed. Fresh disturbance, not 7 years old. Someone had been digging here, and recently. The earth was loose, piled to one side, but they'd stopped before finishing whatever they'd started. Or perhaps they'd been interrupted. Raina's light swept across the floor and caught something else, a leather-bound book half buried in the loose earth. She knelt and carefully extracted it. The cover was water-stained, the pages swollen with moisture, but still readable. She opened it and found herself looking at a ledger. The first entry was dated 9 years ago. March 15th, lost 3 head of cattle. No sign of predation. Gate still locked. The entries continued in the same vein. Livestock disappearing. Strange sounds at night. Equipment moved or damaged. The handwriting was neat, methodical. Someone keeping careful track of incidents that defied explanation. She flipped through the pages, watching the entries grow more frequent and more disturbed. Not animals doing this. Something else. Found all the chickens dead. Necks broken, not eaten. Dennis says he's seen lights in the forest. I believe him now. The final entry stopped her cold. September 3rd. They're not animals. Julie and I are taking the boys to her mother's until this is sorted. Marcus says the bishops are leaving too. We've called the authorities. Whatever is happening here, it ends now. The date was 7 years ago. 3 days before the families disappeared. Raina sat back on her heels, mind racing. The official story was that both families had vanished without warning, without explanation. But this ledger told a different story. They'd been experiencing something, harassment, threats, something that had frightened them enough to leave. And they'd called the authorities. She tucked the ledger under her arm and climbed back up the stairs. The house felt different now, charged with questions. She secured the cellar door again, this time wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. Sleep was impossible. She made coffee as the sky began to lighten and sat at the kitchen table, reading through the ledger again, more carefully. The incidents followed a pattern, escalating over 2 years, growing more brazen and more violent. Whoever had written this, Marcus Torrance, she assumed, had been documenting a campaign of intimidation. But why? And by whom? As the sun rose, she heard the sound of a truck engine. She looked out to see an old Ford pulling up the driveway. Deke Harlow climbed out, moving with the careful deliberation of age. Raina met him on the porch. "You're here early. Couldn't sleep." He looked at her more closely. "Neither could you, by the look of it." She made a decision. "Sakermid start to tend to. Come inside. There's something you need to see." Over coffee, she showed him the ledger. Deke read through it slowly, his expression growing heavier with each page. When he reached the final entry, he closed his eyes. "I should have checked sooner," he said quietly. "Marcus had asked me to look in on the place while they were gone. Said they'd be back in a week, maybe 2. When I finally came by, it had been 3 weeks. The house was empty. The bishop place too. He looked up at her, and she saw the guilt written in every line of his face. "If I'd come when I was supposed to, maybe I could have—" "You couldn't have known, couldn't I?" His voice was rough. "We all knew something wasn't right out here. The way Dennis Bishop started looking over his shoulder. The way Marcus stopped coming into town. We knew, and we told ourselves it wasn't our business. The ledger says they called the authorities." Deke nodded slowly. "Sheriff Moss, he would have been the one they called. And what did he do? He claimed he came out, looked around, didn't see anything amiss. Said they were probably imagining things, getting spooked by the isolation." Deke's jaw tightened. "But he never mentioned that ledger, never mentioned any pattern of incidents. When they disappeared, he treated it like they'd just up and left of their own accord." Rayner felt pieces clicking into place. "The cellar door was open this morning. I'd bolted it shut. Someone's been in there digging in the corner." Deke's face went pale. "You found fresh digging and tire tracks near the barn when I went out yesterday morning. Someone's coming onto this property, Deke. Someone who doesn't want to be seen." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you at the auction, but I wasn't sure. Tell me now." "About a month before the families disappeared, Marcus Torrance came to see me. He was excited, more excited than I'd ever seen him. Said he'd had the property surveyed. Not just the boundaries, but the geology. He'd found something. Wouldn't tell me what exactly, just said it was valuable. Said it could set his family up for life." "What kind of valuable?" "I don't know. But he said he and Dennis Bishop were partners in it now, that they'd worked out an agreement to share whatever profit came from it." Deke looked up, meeting her eyes. "And then, 2 weeks later, they were gone. The implications settled over them like a weight. Whatever the families had found on this property, someone else had wanted it. Wanted it badly enough to drive them away, or worse." "The cellar," Rayner said. "They were digging in the cellar last night. Looking for something or checking on something they'd already hidden there, or making sure it stays hidden." She thought about the open door, the fresh boot prints, the feeling of being watched. Whoever had done this 7 years ago was still here, still active, still protecting whatever secret this land held, and now Rayner owned that land. "I'm not leaving," she said. Deke studied her. "I figured you'd say that. You've got that look about you, stubborn. Determined. Same thing, different word." He stood, joints creaking. "Then I guess I'm staying too. You're going to need someone who knows this country, someone the locals trust. Why would you do that?" His answer was simple and devastating. "Because I should have helped them 7 years ago, and I didn't. I won't make that mistake twice." After Deke left, with a promise to return that afternoon, Rayner stood on the porch and surveyed her property with new eyes. 300 acres of forest and meadow, 2 houses that held the echoes of vanished families, and somewhere beneath it all, a secret worth killing for. The windmill turned in the morning breeze, its shadow sweeping across the ground like a clock's hand. Time had passed, but whatever had happened here wasn't finished. It was still unfolding, and she was now part of it. She went inside and retrieved the ledger, reading through it one more time. Then she took out her phone and photographed every page. If something happened to her, if she disappeared like the Torrances and the Bishops, there would be a record. Someone would know. The question was, would knowing be enough? The morning after finding the ledger, Rayner woke with purpose. She'd spent half the night thinking about what Deke had told her, about the geological survey and the valuable discovery. If the Torrances and Bishops had found something worth protecting or worth stealing, there would be records somewhere. She made coffee and was heading to the second house for another search when something on the porch caught her eye. A book, thick and leather-bound, sitting precisely in the center of the welcome mat. She hadn't put it there. Rayner approached it carefully, as if it might spring at her. The leather was old, cracked at the corners, with a cross embossed on the cover. She opened it and found herself looking at a family Bible, the Bishop family Bible, according to the inscription on the first page, presented to Dennis and Violet Bishop on the occasion of their marriage. June 12, 1982, she carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table, turning pages with care. Birth records, marriage records, deaths recorded in careful script. The Bishop family tree stretched back 4 generations, each name and date lovingly preserved until she reached the final pages. Someone had taken a razor or sharp knife and carefully removed 3 pages from the binding. The cuts were clean, deliberate. Someone had wanted to erase part of the Bishop family history. Raina sat back thinking. The Bible had been in the second house yesterday. She remembered seeing it on a shelf in the parlor. Someone had taken it, removed pages, and left it on her porch as a message. But what message? A warning, a clue? She needed answers, and she knew where to start looking. The Timber Falls County Records Office occupied a corner of the courthouse, a stone building that had stood since 1903. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the efficient manner of someone who'd been doing the same job for 30 years. I need to research property records, Raina said. The old Bishop Ranch. The clerk's expression shifted, not quite suspicion, but close. You're the new owner. News really did travel fast. I am. I'm trying to understand the property's history. What specifically are you looking for? Surveys, geological reports, anything filed in the last 10 years. The clerk disappeared into the back room and returned with a stack of folders. You can use that table. Copy machines in the corner. 10 cents a page. Raina spent the next 3 hours going through records. The Bishop family had owned the property since 1947, passed down through 3 generations. The Torrances had purchased the adjacent parcel, a smaller piece that bordered the Bishop land, in 2015. What interested her more were the survey maps. She found the standard property surveys showing boundaries and structures. But tucked into one folder was something different. A geological survey dated 8 years ago, commissioned by Marcus Torrance. The report was technical, full of terminology she didn't fully understand. But certain phrases jumped out. Unusual mineral concentrations, further testing, recommended, potential commercial viability. Someone had been interested in what lay beneath the surface. She was making copies when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find a man in a sheriff's uniform watching her. He was in his 50s, heavy-set, with a face that suggested he smiled rarely. Sheriff Moss, he said, not offering his hand. Heard we had a new resident, Raina Cole. I know. Small county. He glanced at the documents spread on the table. Doing some research? Just trying to understand what I bought. Place has been empty a long time. Probably best to let sleeping dogs lie. His tone was casual, but his eyes were hard. Tragic situation with the families? We did everything we could. I'm sure you did. Raina kept her voice neutral. Did they ever contact you before they disappeared? Report any problems? Something flickered across Moss's face, so quick she might have imagined it. Nothing like that. They just left one day. Happens sometimes in isolated places. People get cabin fever, decide to start over somewhere else, without their belongings, without their vehicles. There's no explaining what people do. He straightened. Word of advice, Miss Cole. That property's had enough trouble. You do well not to go looking for more. He left before she could respond. The clerk who'd been helping her returned from the back room, glanced at the door Moss had exited through, and lowered her voice. Don't mind the sheriff. He takes his job seriously. Maybe too seriously sometimes. He seems very interested in what I'm researching. The clerk hesitated, then leaned closer. My advice? If you're going to dig into what happened out there, be careful who you talk to about it. Not everyone wants those particular stones turned over. Before Raina could ask what she meant, the clerk returned to her desk. Raina gathered her copies and drove back to the ranch, her mind working through what she'd learned. The geological survey suggested valuable minerals. The families had disappeared after discovering this, and Sheriff Moss very clearly didn't want her asking questions. She stopped at the general store on the way, needing supplies and wanting to talk to Lily Chen again. The store was empty except for Lily, who was restocking shelves. Find what you were looking for at the courthouse? Lily asked. Raina wasn't surprised, she knew. Some of it. Ran into Sheriff Moss. I imagine you did. Lily set down the box she was holding. Let me guess. He told you to stop digging, more or less. Lily was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh something. Finally, she said, My husband worked in mining before we came here. Geological surveys, mineral rights, that was his field. When the Torrances disappeared, I showed him some old reports Marcus had left at the store to be copied. He said the mineral deposits described could be worth millions if they were as extensive as the preliminary data suggested. What kind of minerals? Rare earth elements. The kind used in electronics, renewable energy technology. There's been a push to find domestic sources and deposits like that in a country that's seeing those kinds of shortages. They'd be incredibly valuable. Raina felt pieces sliding into place. So Marcus and Dennis discovered they were sitting on a fortune, and then they vanished. Lily's expression was grave. My husband told me something else. He said accessing those deposits would require serious capital and equipment. The kind of operation that doesn't happen quietly. Someone would need permits, environmental studies, cooperation from local authorities, or they'd need the land to be empty and forgotten. Exactly. Raina bought her supplies and headed back to the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of amber and purple. Beautiful country, she thought again. Worth killing for, apparently. Deke's truck was parked by the barn when she arrived. She found him examining the windmill, tools spread around him. Thought I'd get this old girl running properly, he said. She's been neglected too long. They worked together as the light faded, Raina holding the ladder while Deke oiled the mechanism. The windmill's creaking grew quieter, its rotation smoother. Found some interesting things today, Raina said, and told him about the geological survey and her conversation with Lily. Deke climbed down from the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag. So someone wanted what was under this land badly enough to make two families disappear. And whoever that someone is, they're still around, still checking on things. The question is, what are they waiting for? Say, Raina looked out across the darkening valley. Maybe they're waiting to see what I do. Whether I'm smart enough to leave like they warned me to. And I've never been very good at taking warnings. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with all her copies spread out, mapping connections. The geological survey, the ledger. The missing pages from the Bible. Each piece told part of a story, but the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. Her phone rang at 10:30. Unknown number, she answered, silence on the other end. Then just before whoever it was hung up, she heard breathing. Slow, measured. Someone making sure she knew she was being watched. Raina walked through the house, checking locks, pulling curtains. She retrieved her grandfather's revolver and set it on the nightstand. Then she lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle, to the wind moving through the eaves, to the now silent windmill standing guard in the night. Somewhere out there, someone was nervous. Someone who'd kept secrets buried for 7 years was watching her disturb the ground. Good, she thought. Let them be nervous. Let them wonder what she'd found and what she knew, because tomorrow she was going to find out a lot more. Raina found the map by accident. She was searching the second house's kitchen, looking for anything the families might have left behind that could explain what had happened. Most of the drawers held the usual kitchen implements, spatulas, whisks, measuring cups worn with use. But when she pulled out the drawer beneath the built-in desk, it stuck partway. She yanked harder, and the drawer came free entirely, clattering to the floor. That's when she saw it, a false bottom, or rather a shallow space between the drawer bottom and the actual base. And rolled up in that space, protected and hidden, was a surveyor's map. She unrolled it carefully on the kitchen table. It showed the property in detail, boundaries, structures, elevation markers, the creek that ran through the northeastern section. Standard surveyor's work. Except for the red X marks, 3 of them, scattered across the property. Each marked with coordinates written in the same red ink. One near the creek, one in the dense timber on the north boundary, one in what looked like open meadow on the eastern edge. Raina photographed the map with her phone, then studied it more carefully. The marks didn't correspond to any structures or natural features labeled on the map. They seemed random, unless you knew what you were looking for. She decided to investigate the first mark, the one closest to the houses. According to the coordinates, it was near the creek, about half a mile from where she stood. The walk took 20 minutes. following an overgrown path that suggested people had come this way regularly once. The morning was cool, mist rising from the ground in wisps. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance she heard the rush of water over stone. The coordinates brought her to a spot where the creek curved around a stand of cottonwoods. The ground here was softer, darker, creek silt deposited over years. And it had been disturbed, not recently, but not 7 years ago either. Maybe within the last year or two. The depression in the ground was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But once she saw it, the pattern became clear. Someone had dug here. Something had been buried or removed or both. Raina knelt and ran her fingers through the soil. Loose, turned over, not naturally settled. She dug with her hands, going down 6 inches, then a foot. Nothing but dirt and small stones. Whatever had been here was gone now. She stood and surveyed the area. No signs of recent activity except the disturbed earth. But the location bothered her. Why here specifically? What made this spot important enough to mark on the map? The second location was harder to reach. She had to hike through dense timber, following the compass on her phone and the coordinates she'd written down. The forest was old growth, Douglas fir and ponderosa pine towering overhead, their trunks thick as trucks. The ground was carpeted with needles, and the air smelled of resin and decay. She found the spot after 40 minutes of searching. This one was more obvious. A hunting blind built into the natural landscape, camouflaged but clearly man-made. It was recent construction, maybe a year old. Someone had taken care to make it comfortable. A folding chair, binoculars hanging from a nail, and on the ground, scattered around the base, cigarette butts. Dozens of them. Someone had spent a lot of time here watching. Raina picked up one of the cigarette butts carefully. The brand was visible on the filter. She photographed it, then looked through the blind's opening to see what it faced. The view gave her a clear line of sight to both houses. Her skin crawled. Someone had been watching the property for months, maybe longer. Watching her now that she lived here. The boot prints she'd found made sense suddenly. This person, or people, had been coming and going regularly. She left the blind quickly, feeling exposed despite the thick forest. The walk back to the houses seemed longer than it had going out. Every snapping twig made her turn, every bird call made her pause. When she emerged from the trees, Deke's truck was parked by the barn again. She found him replacing boards on the barn's north wall. Found something, she said, and showed him the photos on her phone. Deke's expression darkened as he looked at the hunting blind. The cigarette butts, the view of the houses. Someone's been keeping an eye on the place. For a long time by the looks of it. And they've been digging at the sites marked on this map. She showed him the surveyor's map. What do you think was there? Evidence, maybe. Or whatever the families found that made this property valuable. Raina looked up at the mountains surrounding them. There's one more marked location. On the eastern boundary. You want company checking it out? She almost said no. She'd been alone so long, it was habit. But this was different. This was potentially dangerous. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. They drove as far as the truck could take them, then hiked the rest of the way on foot. The eastern boundary was the most remote part of the property, where the ranch land gave way to national forest. The terrain was rough, studded with rocks and cut by small ravines. The third X marked a spot in a small clearing surrounded by pines. And here, the signs of disturbance were unmistakable. Fresh excavation. Not days old, weeks, maybe a month. Someone had dug here with professional equipment. The hole was perhaps 8 feet across and 4 feet deep before it had been filled back in. But the fill was loose, obvious, and around the edges, Raina could see the marks left by a backhoe or similar machine. This is recent, Deke said quietly. Very recent. Raina walked the perimeter of the disturbed area. In the soft earth, she found tire tracks, wide, deep. The kind left by heavy equipment. She followed them for 50 yards until they reached what must have been a service road, overgrown but still passable for the right vehicle. They've been using this access point, she said. Coming in from the back, away from the houses. Mining? Maybe. Or checking on something they buried here 7 years ago. They stood in silence, looking at the evidence of someone else's secret work on land that was supposed to be abandoned. The implications were chilling. This wasn't casual trespassing. This was organized, ongoing, and connected to enough money or power to keep operating despite the risk. As they hiked back to the truck, Raina's phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She answered it this time without speaking, just listening. The voice on the other end was male, carefully modulated. Ms. Cole, you're making people nervous. Good, a pause. That property's been quiet for 7 years. It should stay that way. The families who lived here didn't think so. The families made poor choices. I'd hate to see you make the same ones. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Who is this? Someone trying to help you understand the situation. That land you bought, it comes with history. Complicated history. Walking away would be in your best interest. I'm not much for walking away. Another pause, longer this time. Then I'm sorry. I really am. The line went dead. Raina looked at Deke. They're escalating. What are you going to do? She thought about the disturbed earth, the watching blind, the anonymous threats. She thought about 2 families who'd disappeared because they'd stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to know. And she thought about her own stubborn nature, the thing that had kept her moving for 8 years, but also kept her from ever backing down from a fight. I'm going to find out what they're protecting, she said, and then I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it. That could be dangerous. It already is dangerous. But at least now we know what we're dealing with. That night, she sat at the kitchen table and laid out everything she'd learned. The geological survey, the ledger, the map with its marked locations, the evidence of ongoing excavation, the threats. Piece by piece, a picture was emerging. The families had discovered something valuable on this land. They documented it, marked the locations, and prepared to claim their rights. And someone with resources and willingness to commit violence, had stopped them. Now that same someone knew she was asking questions, and they wanted her gone. Raina pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything she knew, everything she suspected. If something happened to her, there needed to be a record. Tomorrow, she'd mail copies to Lily Chen and to the Torrance brother Deke had mentioned. She'd create a trail that couldn't be erased as easily as 2 families had been. Outside, the windmill turned smoothly now, its blades catching the moonlight. The ranch was quiet, but it was the quiet of something waiting, something held in suspension. The storm was coming. She could feel it. The barn's loft was where Raina found the letters. She'd gone up there looking for tools, thinking the families might have stored equipment in the overhead space. The ladder was rickety but solid enough to hold her weight. At the top, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, streaming through gaps in the boards. The loft was full of the usual ranch detritus, old tack, broken furniture, cardboard boxes gone soft with age. She was about to climb back down when she noticed the toolbox. It was red metal, the kind that had been popular 30 years ago, pushed into a corner beneath a moth-eaten saddle blanket. Something about its placement seemed deliberate, hidden, but not so hidden that it couldn't be found by someone looking carefully. Inside the toolbox, beneath a layer of rusted wrenches and screwdrivers, she found the letters. 24 of them, held together with a rubber band that crumbled when she touched it. The envelopes were addressed to Marcus Torrance, and the return address made her pulse quicken. Apex Resource Development, Denver, Colorado. She sat cross-legged in the dusty loft and began reading. The earliest letters were cordial, professional. Apex was interested in conducting a geological survey of the Torrance property. They'd heard through industry channels that the area might contain deposits of interest. Would Mr. Torrance be willing to grant access for preliminary testing? Marcus's responses, carbon copies kept with the originals, were cautious but interested. He wanted to understand what they were looking for and what any discovery might mean for his family. The correspondence continued over 6 months, growing more specific. Apex's tests had revealed significant deposits of rare earth minerals, particularly neodymium and dysprosium, elements crucial for modern technology and in short supply. The potential value was enormous, easily tens of millions of dollars, but the later letters showed a shift in tone. Apex wanted to purchase the mineral rights outright for what Marcus clearly felt was far below market value. His responses became firmer, more suspicious. He'd done his own research. He knew what the deposits were worth. The final letter from Apex was dated 3 months before the disappearances. The tone was no longer cordial. "Mr. Torrance, we must insist you reconsider our offer. The extraction process is complex and dangerous. Without proper expertise and resources, attempting to develop these deposits independently would be both financially ruinous and potentially life-threatening. We strongly encourage you to accept our terms." Marcus's handwritten notes in the margin read, "Threat? Talk to Dennis. Need legal advice." There were no more letters after that. Rayna photographed every page, then carefully replaced the letters in the toolbox exactly as she'd found them. Whoever had been searching the property might not know about this hiding spot yet, and she wanted to keep it that way. Back in the house, she researched Apex Resource Development on her laptop. The company had been dissolved 8 years ago, just a year after the families disappeared. The registered agent was a law firm in Denver. The officers listed were corporate types with minimal online presence. A shell company designed to provide deniability, but one name caught her attention. Listed as a consultant to Apex, Richard Vance. She dug deeper and found him, currently CEO of Vance Mining Enterprises, a mid-sized operation with projects across the western states. His corporate bio mentioned expertise in rare earth extraction and a track record of identifying overlooked deposits in the American West. She was printing out everything she'd found when Lily Chen knocked on her door. "Brought you some fresh bread," Lily said, holding out a cloth-wrapped loaf. But her expression was troubled. "And I wanted to talk to you." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Lily shared what she knew. "My husband and we've been talking about what you're looking into." He remembered something he'd forgotten to mention. "About Sheriff Moss. What about him?" "His brother-in-law worked for a mining company about 10 years ago. Consulting work, site assessments. My husband ran into them at a restaurant once, and the brother-in-law was talking about a big opportunity in the area. Said it was going to make them all rich." Rayna felt the pieces clicking together. "Did your husband remember which company?" He wasn't sure, but he thought it might have been Apex or something similar. It was right around the time Marcus was having his property surveyed. Sheriff Moss, connected to mining interests, in a position to control investigations and suppress evidence. If the families had called him for help, they'd been calling the one person who couldn't help them, who might have been part of the problem. "There's more," Lily said quietly. "Last night, someone came into the store asking about you. Man I'd never seen before, maybe 45, well-dressed for around here. Wanted to know what you'd been buying, whether you'd mentioned any plans. What did you tell him?" "That you keep to yourself, and it wasn't my business to share customer information." Lily's expression hardened. But he made me nervous, Rayna. The way he asked, it wasn't casual curiosity. He was gathering intelligence." After Lily left, Rayna sat alone, thinking. The pressure was increasing. Anonymous calls, strangers asking questions, the implicit threats. Someone was very worried about what she might discover. Her phone rang. This time the number was local. She recognized the area code. "Ms. Cole, this is Sheriff Moss." His voice was stiff, formal. "I need you to come down to the station. There's been a complaint filed against you." "What kind of complaint?" "Trespassing on private property. Adjacent landowner says you've been cutting across their land without permission." "That's not true. I've stayed within my property boundaries. Nevertheless, I need you to come in and make a statement. This afternoon would be best." It was harassment, pure and simple. An attempt to intimidate her, to make her understand that they could make her life difficult. But two could play that game. "I'll be there at 2 o'clock, she said. "And I'm bringing documentation of my property boundaries and everywhere I've been on my own land. If there's been trespassing, Sheriff, I think we need to talk about who's actually doing it." His pause told her the message had landed. 2 o'clock then. She spent the next hour preparing. Copies of the surveyor's map, photos of the excavation sites, documentation of the tire tracks and disturbed earth. She couldn't prove who was responsible yet, but she could establish a pattern of illegal activity on her property. Deke arrived as she was getting ready to leave. She explained where she was going. "You want me to come with you?" No, but if I'm not back by 5, call that reporter you mentioned. The one who covered the original disappearances. Tell him everything. Raina, I don't think Moss will actually do anything to me. Too obvious. But I want insurance. The drive to Timber Falls took 30 minutes. The sheriff's station was a small building next to the courthouse, brick and functional. Inside, a deputy sat at the front desk, barely looking up as she entered. Raina Cole. I have an appointment with Sheriff Moss. The deputy gestured toward a hallway. Second door on the right. Moss's office was neat to the point of sterility. No personal photos, no clutter. Just files, a computer, and a desk that looked like it had been cleared moments before she arrived. Ms. Cole. Moss didn't stand or offer to shake hands. Thank you for coming in. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Sheriff. We both know why I'm really here. His expression didn't change. I don't know what you mean. Someone's been using my property for illegal mining operations. Someone's been watching my house from a hunting blind built in my timber. And someone wants me to stop asking questions about what happened to the Torrance and Bishop families. She leaned forward. Now either you're incompetent and haven't noticed any of this, or you're involved. Which is it? Moss's jaw tightened. Those are serious accusations. They are. And I have evidence to support them. She pulled out her phone and showed him photos, the excavation sites, the tire tracks, the hunting blind. All of this on my property. All of it recent. When were you planning to investigate? I'd need to verify those photos are actually from your property. I'm sure you would. I'm also sure that if I sent these to the state police, they'd be very interested in conducting their own investigation. Especially given the history of 2 families disappearing from this same property 7 years ago. Families who, according to documents I've found, had contacted you for help shortly before they vanished. The silence stretched between them. Moss's face had gone carefully blank, but she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Finally, he said, "What do you want?" "I want the truth. I want to know what happened to those families. And I want whoever's responsible to be held accountable. You're playing a dangerous game. It's not a game. 2 families are dead, Sheriff. Or do you have evidence they're alive somewhere?" He stood abruptly. "This conversation is over. You can go. What about the trespassing complaint?" "I'll look into it." His tone made it clear there had never been a complaint. Raina drove back to the ranch, with her hands tight on the wheel, adrenaline making her heart race. She'd pushed Moss, forced him to acknowledge the situation. But she'd also shown her hand. He knew what she knew, and he'd report back to whoever he answered to. The situation was escalating, and she'd just accelerated it. As she pulled up to the house, she noticed something wrong immediately. The front door was ajar. She always locked it. Raina reached for her grandfather's revolver in the glove compartment and approached the house carefully. Inside, everything had been searched. Not tossed randomly, but methodically gone through. Drawers opened, cushions moved, papers scattered. They were looking for something. The letters, probably, or the ledger, or the map. But everything important was either photographed and backed up online or secured in locations they didn't know about yet. She'd learned from watching crime shows over the years, never keep all your evidence in one place. Still, the violation made her angry. This was her home now, and they'd invaded it. She called Deke. "They've been inside. The place has been searched. You okay?" "I'm fine. But it's time to take this to the next level. Can you get me that reporter's contact information?" "Already done. I'll text it to you." After she hung up, Raina stood in her searched house and made a decision. No more reacting. It was time to go on the offense. The recording device was hidden in the air vent above the kitchen table. Raina found it the morning after her house had been searched, during a systematic sweep of every room. She'd learned basic counter-surveillance techniques years ago from a friend who'd worked in security. Most people didn't think to look up, so that's where she started. The device was small, battery-powered, professional grade. Not something you picked up at an electronics store. Someone had been listening to every conversation she'd had in this house, monitoring her movements, gathering intelligence. Her first instinct was to rip it out and destroy it. But then she had a better idea. She left the device in place and spent the afternoon staging a phone call. She made sure to stand directly under the vent, speaking clearly. "Hey, it's me." "Yeah, I know it's been a while." She paused as if listening. "Look, I wanted to let you know. I'm probably going to head back east next week. This ranch thing isn't working out. Too isolated, too much work. I'm going to put it back on the market." Another pause. "No, I haven't found anything interesting. Just an old property with a sad history. Not worth the trouble." She ended the fake call and went about her evening as normal, wondering how long it would take for her watchers to believe she was giving up. The answer came 2 days later. In the meantime, she'd been busy with her real plan. The reporter Deke had recommended was named Tom Bradshaw, a man in his 60s who'd covered rural Montana for 40 years before retiring. When she called him, his interest was immediate. "I remember the Bishop and Torrance cases," he said. "Bothered me then, bothers me now." Nothing about those disappearances made sense. They met at a diner 2 towns over, far enough from Timber Falls that curious eyes wouldn't notice. Tom was tall and lean, with sharp eyes and a notebook that never left his hand. She laid out everything: the geological survey, the letters from Apex, the excavation sites, Sheriff Moss's connections, the surveillance and intimidation. Tom listened, taking notes, asking pointed questions. When she finished, he sat back and let out a low whistle. "This is bigger than I thought. You're talking about a systematic operation to steal mineral rights worth millions, murder to cover it up, ongoing illegal mining, and local law enforcement complicity. Can you help? I can get this to people who'll take it seriously. State police, FBI maybe. But I need more than photos and circumstantial evidence. I need something concrete that ties specific people to specific crimes." "What about the families?" "Their bodies are probably buried on that property somewhere." "That's concrete, it is. But finding them after 7 years," he shook his head, "it would take a major investigation. Ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, forensic teams. And to get that kind of resource commitment, we need to give them a compelling reason." Raina thought about the cellar, the disturbed earth, the places marked on the map. "They're there. I know they are. The question is where exactly. Keep gathering evidence. Document everything. And be careful. These people have already killed twice. They won't hesitate to do it again." On the drive back, Raina stopped at a different town to mail packages. 3 of them, each containing copies of everything she'd found. One to Tom Bradshaw, one to Lily Chen, one to Marcus Torrance's brother, whose address Deke had tracked down. Insurance, in case something happened to her. She arrived back at the ranch after dark to find Deke's truck parked by the barn, lights on inside. She found him in the workshop examining something on the workbench. "Found this buried near the creek," he said, holding up a plastic case. "Thought you should see it. Inside the case was a cell phone. Old model, maybe 10 years out of date, but protected from the elements by the waterproof container." Raina turned it on, not expecting it to work. It powered up. The battery was dead, but when she connected it to Deke's truck charger, the screen glowed to life. The phone was locked, but the emergency information screen showed a name: Marcus Torrance. Her heart raced. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Near where you showed me that disturbed earth by the creek. I was walking the area, looking for anything unusual, and caught the sun glinting off the plastic. It was buried about 8 inches down, like someone had tried to hide it but didn't go deep enough. Can we get into it?" "Not without the passcode." "But my nephew works in tech. He might be able to help if you're willing to trust him. At this point, I'll take any help I can get." They drove to the next county over, where Deke's nephew ran a computer repair shop. Jake Harlow was in his 30s, with the casual competence of someone who'd been taking things apart and putting them back together his whole life. "This'll take a couple hours," Jake said, examining the phone. "I can bypass the lock, but I can't guarantee what state the data's in." 7 years. "Do what you can," Raina said. They waited in a coffee shop down the street. Deke was quiet, staring into his mug. "You thinking about them?" Raina asked. "The families," he nodded. "I knew those kids. Marcus's boys, good kids, full of energy. And Dennis and Violet were like family to me. Dennis taught me half of what I know about engines and honest work." His voice roughened. "They trusted me to look after things, and I let them down. You didn't know." I should have. I should have pressed harder when things felt wrong. Should have gone to the state police instead of trusting Moss. He looked up at her. You're doing what I should have done 7 years ago. We're doing it now. That's what matters. When Jake called them back to the shop, his expression was grim. I got into it. You need to see this. The phone's data was mostly intact. Text messages, photos, call logs. Jake had pulled everything onto his computer. The last messages Marcus had sent were to Dennis Bishop. Meeting tonight. 8 p.m. Barn. We need to show them we have proof. Bring copies of everything. This ends tonight. The photos showed documents, mineral surveys, legal papers, photographs of equipment and trucks. Marcus had been building a case, documenting whoever was illegally accessing his property. The final photo was time-stamped the night of the disappearances. It showed 3 men standing by the barn. Raina zoomed in, heart pounding. One of the men was Sheriff Moss. She didn't recognize the other 2, but their faces were clear enough to identify. Marcus had photographed his killers hours before they'd killed him. Can you email these to me? Raina asked Jake. And keep a backup copy somewhere safe. Already done. Sent it to my secure cloud storage. On the drive back, Raina's mind raced with possibilities and dangers. She had concrete evidence now. Proof that Moss had been on the property the night the families disappeared. That Marcus had been documenting illegal activity. That this wasn't just theory and suspicion, but it also meant she was holding information that made her a target. The people who'd killed 2 families wouldn't hesitate to tie up another loose end. You should leave, Deke said quietly. Give all this to the state police and get out of here, and let them clean up the evidence while I'm gone. Destroy whatever's left? No, we're too close. You're one person against an organization that's been running this operation for years. I'm not alone. I have you. I have Lily. I have Tom Bradshaw and his connections. She looked over at him. And I have something they don't expect. I'm not afraid of them. When they reached the ranch, everything looked normal. Too normal. The quiet felt deliberate, staged. Raina went inside cautiously, checking rooms. Nothing had been disturbed this time. But when she sat down at the kitchen table, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The scratched photograph. The one that had appeared on her porch that first night was now on the kitchen table, and beneath it a new photograph. This one recent in color. It showed her standing by the creek, taken from the hunting blind. Someone had been inside again, and they wanted her to know she was being watched. But there was something else, a detail in the old photograph she hadn't noticed before. She held it up to the light, examining the background. The barn's roof was different in the photo, a different color. This photo was older than 7 years. Much older. She looked closer at the scratched-out faces, and a chill ran down her spine. The scratches weren't random. They'd been done carefully, methodically. Someone hadn't wanted these faces recognized. Why would someone scratch out faces in an old family photo from before the Torrance and Bishop families even lived here? Unless what happened 7 years ago wasn't the first time people had disappeared from this property. Raina sat in the darkening kitchen, the weight of realization settling over her. The secret of this land ran deeper than she'd thought. The mineral deposits were valuable, yes. But someone had been willing to kill for them repeatedly over years, maybe decades. How many bodies were buried out there? She picked up her phone and called Tom Bradshaw. I think I know why they're so desperate, she said. And it's worse than we thought. The vehicles came just after midnight. Raina had stayed awake, positioned where she could watch the property through darkened windows. She'd learned the pattern now. They came when they thought she was asleep, when they believed they were safe from observation. 2 trucks, moving slowly without headlights. They knew the roads well enough to navigate by moonlight. She watched them drive past the houses toward the eastern boundary, heading for one of the excavation sites. She gave them a 10-minute head start, then followed on foot with her phone recording video. The night was cold, her breath misting in the air. She moved carefully, staying in the tree line, using the skills she'd learned years ago during a brief period working for a private investigation firm. At the excavation site, she counted 5 men. They'd brought equipment, shovels, a portable generator, work lights they hadn't turned on yet. They were arguing about something, voices carrying in the still night air. Raina crept closer until she could hear them clearly, her phone camera capturing everything. Should have been more careful. She's not like the others. She'll leave. They always leave when they understand the stakes. And if she doesn't? A pause. Then a voice she recognized. Sheriff Moss. Then we handle it like we handled the others. This operation is too valuable to risk. That's 8 bodies now. Eventually someone's going to dig deep enough. Nobody's going to dig. This land is tied up in legal complications that'll take years to sort out. By the time anyone gets close to the truth, we'll have extracted what we need and disappeared. Raina's hands shook as she recorded. This was it, a direct confession. But the number made her stomach turn. 8 bodies, not just the Torrance and Bishop families. Who else had died for this land? The men began working, one operating the generator while others set up equipment. They were systematic, professional. This wasn't their first time. As they worked, another vehicle approached, expensive, newer than the trucks. A man in his 50s stepped out, well-dressed even for a midnight meeting in the wilderness. He surveyed the scene with the air of someone used to being in charge. "Status," he called out. Sheriff Moss approached him. "We're on schedule, another 3 months, and we'll have extracted enough to make this profitable. After that, we can shut down and let someone else worry about the property." "And the woman?" "She's a problem. She's been talking to people, asking questions. Found some of Torrance's old documentation." The well-dressed man, Raina recognized him from her research as Richard Vance, the mining executive, swore softly. "I thought you said that had all been cleaned up. We got most of it, but Marcus was thorough. And she's smart. She's connected pieces we didn't think anyone would find. Then we need to accelerate the timeline, finish the extraction and close the operation, and deal with Ms. Cole permanently. Make it look like an accident. The isolated woman living alone, tragic but not suspicious. When? Within the week. We can't risk her taking this to federal authorities." Raina had heard enough. She had them on camera confessing to murder, to illegal mining, to planning her death. It was time to leave. She backed away carefully, keeping the phone recording. But in her focus on the men, she didn't see the 6th person, someone who'd been positioned as a lookout. Her foot came down on a branch, the crack impossibly loud in the quiet night. "Someone's there!" a voice shouted. Raina ran. Behind her, chaos erupted. Shouts, the sound of people crashing through underbrush. She had a head start, and she knew the property better than they did now, but they had numbers and equipment. She made it to the creek, crossed it at a shallow point, and headed toward the main road. If she could reach her truck, a flashlight beam caught her, then another. They were coordinating, trying to surround her. Raina changed direction, heading for the dense timber where vehicles couldn't follow. Her lungs burned, legs pumping. She could hear them behind her getting closer. She needed to hide, to preserve the recording, to survive long enough to get this evidence to someone who could act on it. The old hunting blind. They knew about it, had built it, but maybe they wouldn't expect her to use their own position against them. She reached it and climbed up, pressing herself into the shadows. Her phone was still recording. She quickly uploaded the video file to cloud storage, sent copies to Tom Bradshaw and Lily Chen with a message. "If you're getting this, I'm in danger. This is proof. Send to FBI immediately." Below, flashlight beams swept through the forest, men calling to each other, coordinating their search. She heard Moss's voice. "Find her. She can't have gone far." Raina waited, barely breathing, as they searched for another hour. Finally, one of the men said, "She's gone. Must have made it to the road. Check her house," Vance ordered. "If she's there, we end this tonight." They left, trucks rumbling back toward the houses. Raina stayed in the blind for another 30 minutes, making sure they weren't doubling back. Then she climbed down and headed away from the ranch toward the main road. She'd hidden her truck a mile away earlier in the week, preparing for exactly this scenario. But instead of driving away, she headed to a different destination, the county courthouse, 2 towns over. She needed to understand something that had been nagging at her since she'd found that old photograph. The courthouse would be closed, but she knew how to get into public records rooms. Her late husband had been a lawyer, and she'd learned a few tricks. The lock on the records room door was old. It took her 10 minutes with a credit card and patience. Inside, she found the property records and began digging through files dating back decades. The Bishop family ownership, the transfers, the deeds, and there it was. The detail that changed everything. The Bishop family hadn't owned the property through normal sale. It had been transferred to them in 1947 through a land trust. And the terms of that trust were specific. The land would remain in the Bishop family line as long as there were direct descendants. If the line ended, ownership would revert to the trust administrators. Rayner pulled out more documents. Dennis Bishop had no children. He'd been the last of his line. When he disappeared, the trust should have reclaimed the property. But it hadn't. Instead, the property had been put up for auction as if it were ordinary abandoned real estate. Someone had falsified documents, bypassed the trust requirements, and created an illegal sale. She photographed everything, her mind racing. This meant her purchase might not be valid. But more importantly, it meant someone had gone to elaborate lengths to maintain control of property they had no legal right to. She found another document, the original land grant from 1889. It detailed the trust's purpose, to protect the land. For the Bishop descendants in perpetuity, with mineral rights retained by the trust for the benefit of the family line. The mineral rights had never belonged to Dennis Bishop. They belonged to the trust, and whoever was mining them was stealing from the trust, not just from the families who'd lived there. This was bigger than murder for profit. This was a systematic scheme to steal from a legal trust, falsify documents, and eliminate anyone who discovered the truth. Rayner gathered everything she needed and left the courthouse as dawn was breaking. She drove to a truck stop with Wi-Fi and sent everything to Tom Bradshaw, along with a detailed explanation. His response came 30 minutes later. "This changes everything. I'm contacting the FBI Trust Crimes Division. Stay somewhere public and safe. Don't go back to the ranch." But Rayner couldn't do that. Everything she needed to prove the full scope of the crime was on that property. The bodies that would confirm the murders. The evidence of the illegal mining operation. The connection between the falsified documents and the people responsible. She called Deke. "I need your help. And I need you to trust me." "What's going on?" She told him everything. The midnight confrontation, the confession she'd recorded, the trust documents she'd found. "They're planning to kill me and shut down the operation. But if we can document what they're doing before they clean it up, we have them, all of them. That's too dangerous. It's the only way. We need physical evidence, not just recordings and documents. We need to force their hand before they can destroy everything." There was a long pause. Then Deke said, "I know 2 ranch hands who can be trusted, men who've lived here their whole lives and won't take kindly to murder and theft on their watch. We'll need them if this goes bad. Can they be there by tonight?" "They can be there in 2 hours. Rayner spent the day planning. She researched Richard Vance, finding connections to other mining operations that had faced environmental violations and suspicious circumstances. She mapped out the property, identifying the most likely burial sites based on the excavation patterns she'd observed, and she prepared for the possibility that this might not end well. By evening, she met Deke and his 2 friends, Roy and Pete, both in their 60s. Both carrying the weathered competence of men who'd spent their lives working. Hard country. They gathered at a diner 30 miles from Timber Falls. "Here's the situation," Rayner said, and laid out everything. "The murders, the mining operation, the falsified documents, the threats." Roy whistled low. "That's quite a conspiracy." "It is. And tonight they're going to come back to the property. They think I'm either gone or hiding. They're going to try to extract as much as they can before authorities get involved. We're going to document everything, get it on camera from multiple angles, and make sure the FBI has undeniable proof. And if they catch us? Pete asked. Then we have a bigger problem. But Moss and Vance think they're safe, think they've gotten away with this for years. Confidence makes people careless. We use that against them. They spent the next hour coordinating. Each person would take a position with a phone camera. They'd record everything, upload it in real time to cloud storage. If anyone was caught, the others would immediately contact the authorities. As darkness fell, they drove separately to the ranch, parking vehicles at different access points. Raina approached from the east, moving through timber she now knew better than the people who'd been stealing from it. The trucks were already there when she arrived. 6 men this time with more equipment. They were serious about this extraction, working quickly under portable lights. Raina found her position and began recording. Around the property, Deke, Roy and Pete did the same. Multiple angles, multiple witnesses, undeniable documentation. For 2 hours, she watched them work. They were pulling out refined materials, already processed from ore they must have been extracting for months or years. The operation was sophisticated, well-funded, and completely illegal. Sheriff Moss supervised, checking his watch frequently. Nervous, they knew time was running out. Knew that Raina's questions had attracted attention they couldn't control forever. Then Richard Vance arrived, and the tone shifted. He walked through the operation, examining the hall, calculating something on a tablet. "This is it," he announced. "After tonight, we shut it down. Pull out all equipment, fill in the excavation sites, and disappear. As far as anyone knows, this was just abandoned land where some families vanished years ago. What about the evidence we couldn't clean up?" one of the workers asked. "It stays buried. Without bodies, there's no murder case. Without proof of our operation, there's no theft. We've been careful. The woman is the only real threat, and she'll be handled. She uploaded videos," Moss said. "I got a call from someone who received files from her." Vance's expression darkened. "Then we move faster. Finish loading the trucks. We're leaving tonight. And Moss, you make sure Ms. Cole meets with an unfortunate accident. Make it look like she fell in the mountains, got lost. Tragic but unsuspicious." From her position, Raina saw Deke move. He'd positioned himself with the best angle on Vance's confession. His camera would have captured everything. They had them. Complete confessions to murder, theft, and conspiracy. Multiple recordings from multiple witnesses. Evidence of the ongoing mining operation. Everything the FBI would need. Now they just had to survive long enough to deliver it. The package arrived at Tom Bradshaw's house at 6 in the morning, delivered by overnight courier. Inside was everything Marcus Torrance had compiled before his death. His brother had finally been convinced to send it, understanding that the truth was worth the risk. Soil samples, geological analysis, survey data, and a note that made Tom's blood run cold. "If you're reading this, something has happened to us. The samples prove what we found. Rare earth deposits worth over $100 million. We contacted authorities. Sheriff Moss said he'd investigate. The next day, men in suits came to our property and made threats. They said this was beyond local law, that we were interfering with national security interests. Dennis and I decided to take the families somewhere safe until we could get federal protection. If we don't return, the truth is in these documents. Don't let them win." Tom immediately forwarded everything to his contact at the FBI field office in Helena. Then he tried calling Raina. No answer. He called Deke's number. It went to voicemail. Something was wrong. Meanwhile, at the ranch, dawn was breaking over a property that would never be the same. Raina, Deke, Roy, and Pete had maintained their positions through the night, documenting everything. The mining crew had worked until 4 in the morning, loading their trucks with refined materials worth millions. Now, in the pale morning light, they were preparing to leave. But first, they had one final task. "Burn it," Vance ordered, gesturing toward the excavation sites. "Use accelerant. Make it look like a wildfire swept through. It'll destroy any remaining evidence." Raina watched as men began spreading gasoline around the sites. They were thorough, professional. This was their cleanup protocol, probably used before. She checked her phone. The videos had uploaded successfully. Tom Bradshaw had them, along with multiple backups. Even if Vance succeeded in burning the physical evidence, the recordings would remain, but there was still the matter of the bodies. 8 people buried somewhere on this property. Without recovering them, there would always be doubt, always the possibility that defense lawyers could create reasonable doubt about the murders. She'd been thinking about this all night. The cellar had been disturbed recently. The map showed 3 marked sites, but there might be more. And that old photograph with the scratched-out faces suggested this had been going on longer than she'd initially thought. The families hadn't just been murdered. They'd been erased, their histories scrubbed, their bodies hidden so thoroughly that no search party had found them. But Marcus had left clues. The phone he'd buried, protected in waterproof casing. The letters hidden in the barn loft. The ledger in the cellar. He'd known he was in danger. And he'd prepared for the possibility that someone would come looking for answers. Rayna thought about the cairn Deke had mentioned once, the small pile of rocks he'd seen near the north boundary. At the time, it had seemed like just another ranch marker. But what if it was more than that? She texted the others, north boundary. Look for cairn. Might be marker. Deke's response came 2 minutes later. I know where it is. Meeting you there after they leave. The mining crew finished their preparation and began loading into their trucks. Vance walked the perimeter one final time, checking everything with the meticulous attention of someone who'd done this before. Moss, he called out. Handle the woman today. No more delays. And make sure there's nothing connecting us to this property, the sheriff nodded. It's handled. The trucks pulled out, heading down the back access road. Rayna waited 30 minutes to make sure they were really gone, then emerged from her hiding spot. Her body ached from hours of staying still, but adrenaline pushed the discomfort aside. Deke, Roy, and Pete met her near the barn. They looked as exhausted as she felt. We got everything, Deke said. Every confession, every detail of their operation. It's uploaded and backed up. Good, because now comes the hard part. Rayna pulled out the survey map. They've been searching specific locations for 7 years. Marcus marked these spots for a reason, and Moss mentioned something about a cairn near the north boundary. I think that's where they buried the families. They hiked to the north boundary, following Deke's lead. The terrain was rough here, rocky and forested, the kind of place where disturbed earth would settle back into the landscape after a few seasons. The cairn was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Just a pile of stones arranged carefully, deliberately. Someone had built it as a marker, and Rayna had a terrible suspicion about who. Moss, she said quietly. He marked where he buried them. Insurance, in case he needed leverage against his partners. Deke knelt by the cairn. There's something underneath. They carefully removed the stones. Beneath, wrapped in plastic, was a metal box. Inside the box, wallets, identification cards, jewelry, and personal effects. 8 sets of the Marcus Torrance, Julie Torrance, their 2 boys, Dennis Bishop, Violet Bishop, and 2 others, a man and woman whose IDs showed they'd lived on this property in the 1990s. Rayna's hands shook as she photographed everything. He kept their effects, proof of what he'd done, hidden where only he would know to look. Why keep evidence of his own crimes? Roy asked. Insurance, Pete said. If Vance or the others tried to cut him out or throw him under the bus, he could prove they were all involved in multiple murders. They'd found the proof they needed. Now they had to preserve it and get it to authorities before Moss realized what they'd discovered. Rayna was packaging the evidence when her phone rang. Tom Bradshaw, the FBI is taking this seriously, he said without preamble. They're sending a team from Helena. Should be there by this afternoon. But Rayna, they're also issuing an alert for Sheriff Moss to bring you in for questioning. He's convinced them you're mentally unstable and making false accusations. He's trying to get me isolated so he can kill me. I know. That's why I'm calling. Don't go anywhere alone. Stay in public places. The FBI agents will contact you directly when they arrive. Tom, I found the burial site and evidence Moss kept from all the murders. We need forensic teams here immediately. His sharp intake of breath told her he understood the significance. I'm calling the field office now. Don't touch anything else. This is a crime scene. Multiple crime scenes. After hanging up, Rayna turned to the others. FBI's coming, but Moss doesn't know that yet. He thinks he has time to clean this up. We need to make sure this evidence gets to federal authorities, not local law enforcement. What's the plan? Deke asked. We split up. Deke, you take the metal box and the memory cards with all our recordings. Drive to Helena, straight to the FBI field office. Don't stop, don't talk to anyone local. Roy and Pete, you're witnesses. Go to Tom Bradshaw's house and stay there until the FBI arrives. He's expecting you. What about you? Pete asked. I'm staying here. This is my property, and I'm not running anymore. But I'll stay visible. Stay where Moss can't make me disappear quietly. That's dangerous, Deke said. Everything about this is dangerous. But if I leave, they'll destroy whatever evidence is left. I need to protect this site until federal authorities arrive. They argued for another 10 minutes, but Rayna was immovable. Finally, reluctantly, they agreed to her plan. Deke took the evidence and headed for his truck. Roy and Pete followed in their vehicle. Rayna was alone on the property for the first time in days. The morning sun was climbing, burning off the mist that lay over the valley. Beautiful country. It had seen terrible things, held terrible secrets. But now, finally, those secrets would be exposed. She walked back to the main house, aware that Moss might arrive at any time. She wasn't afraid, or rather, she was afraid but refused to let fear control her. She'd spent 8 years running from grief and loss. She was done running. Inside, she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table waiting. The recording device was still in the vent above her. Let them listen. Let them know she wasn't leaving. The call came at 10 o'clock. Sheriff Moss, his voice falsely concerned. Ms. Cole, I need you to come to the station. There are some questions about your allegations against local officials. I'll wait here. The FBI is sending agents to interview me. A pause. The FBI? Yes, they're very interested in the trust documents I found. And the evidence of illegal mining. And the confessions I recorded last night. She let that sink in. Oh, and Sheriff? I found the cairn. I know what you kept there. The line went dead. Rayna set the phone down and picked up her grandfather's revolver, checking the cylinder. She wasn't a violent person, had never wanted to hurt anyone. But she would defend herself if necessary. The waiting was the hardest part. Minutes stretched like hours. She stayed alert, watching the road, listening for vehicles. When Moss's truck finally appeared, he wasn't alone. 2 other vehicles followed, expensive SUVs. Vance and his people, coming to tie up their loose end. They parked near the house, but didn't immediately approach. She could see them talking, arguing maybe. They knew she had evidence, knew the FBI was involved. But they'd come too far, invested too much to walk away now. Finally, Sheriff Moss climbed out and walked toward the house. Alone, but Rayna could see others positioning themselves around the property. They were trying to surround her, cut off escape routes. She met Moss on the porch, the revolver visible in her hand but not raised. That's close enough, Sheriff? He stopped at the bottom of the steps. His face was drawn, aged 10 years overnight. You should have left when you had the chance. You should have let those families live. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The operation was supposed to be clean, in and out before anyone noticed. But Marcus got curious, started testing the soil, and once he knew what was here, he couldn't be reasoned with, so you killed them. All of them, even the children. Moss flinched. That wasn't the plan. Vance said we'd just scare them off, but things got out of hand. 8 people, Sheriff. How did things get out of hand 8 times? He had no answer for that. Behind him, Richard Vance stepped out of his SUV. He looked calm, collected, like a man attending a business meeting. Ms. Cole, this doesn't have to end badly. We can still reach an accommodation. I don't make deals with murderers. Everyone has a price. Name yours, Justice. For the families you killed, for the land you stole, for every law you broke. Vance's expression hardened. Then you've made your choice. In the distance, Rayna heard sirens. The sirens weren't local. Rayna could tell by the sound. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. The pitch and rhythm different from county sheriff units. State police, maybe. Or federal agents. Moss heard them too. His hand moved toward his sidearm. Don't, Rayna said quietly, raising the revolver. It's over. It's not over until I say it is. But his voice carried no conviction. He knew what those sirens meant. Everything he'd protected for 7 years was collapsing around him. Vance had already moved back toward his vehicle, barking orders to his men. They were scrambling, trying to decide whether to run or fight or surrender. Years of careful planning unraveling in minutes. The first vehicles to arrive weren't local at all. FBI, the letters stark on black SUVs, 6 of them blocking the access roads, preventing escape. Agents emerged with weapons drawn, taking positions with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. A woman in her 40s approached the house, badge held high. FBI. Everyone stay where you are. Sheriff Moss's shoulders slumped. His hand moved away from his weapon. Rayna lowered her revolver but didn't put it down. Not yet. Special Agent Kelly Price, the woman said, addressing Rayna. You're Ms. Cole. I am. We've reviewed the evidence Mr. Harlow delivered to our Helena office, and we've been in contact with Mr. Bradshaw. Price looked at Moss, her expression hardening. Sheriff Wayne Moss, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, theft of trust property, and falsification of government documents. 2 agents moved forward, cuffing Moss. He didn't resist, just stared at Rayna with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been relief. Vance tried to make it to his vehicle. He almost succeeded, hand on the door handle when agents tackled him. Unlike Moss, he fought, screaming about lawyers and false arrests and how they'd regret this. The other men surrendered quietly, hands raised. They'd been hired help, probably not fully understanding what they'd been part of. Their expressions showed shock, fear, the dawning realization that they'd been accessories to murder. Price approached Rayna. We need to secure the property. You've indicated there's a burial site? North boundary, marked by a cairn. And there may be others at the excavation sites? Rayna's voice was steadier than she felt. Sheriff Moss kept personal effects from the victims. My associate has them, along with identification for 8 people. 8. Price's expression tightened. The reports we received mentioned 2 families. There were others. Before the Torrances and Bishops. This has been going on for at least 20 years, maybe longer. Price called for forensic teams, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. Within an hour, the property was swarming with federal agents, each team assigned to specific tasks. Crime scene tape went up. Evidence markers dotted the landscape. Rayna sat on her porch, watching the organized chaos. Deke arrived with FBI escort, returning now that it was safe. He sat beside her, neither of them speaking at first. It's really over, he said finally. Almost. Rayna watched as agents carefully dismantled the cairn, exposing what lay beneath. They still have to find the bodies, prove the murders, build a case that'll hold up in court. They'll find them. With Moss's evidence and all our recordings, they'll find them. Agent Price returned as the sun climbed higher. Ms. Cole, we're going to need your full statement. But first, I wanted to inform you that preliminary examination of the cairn site has revealed human remains. Multiple sets. We're bringing in forensic anthropologists to properly excavate and identify them. Rayna closed her eyes. She'd known had been certain. But knowing and having it confirmed were different things. The families can finally have proper burials, Deke said quietly. Yes. Price's voice softened. Thanks to you both. If you hadn't documented this, if you hadn't pushed for the truth, these people would have remained missing forever. Over the next hours, Rayna gave her statement. She detailed everything from the auction to the recordings to the discovery of the trust documents. Other agents interviewed Deke, Roy, and Pete. Tom Bradshaw arrived with additional documentation, everything he'd compiled over weeks of investigation. The scope of the conspiracy became clearer. Vance's company had been systematically identifying properties with valuable deposits, then using various means to gain illegal access. The trust land had been particularly attractive, because the complicated legal status made it easier to hide their activities. When the rightful owners or residents discovered what was happening, they were eliminated. Moss had been the local facilitator, using his position to control investigations and ensure no one looked too closely. It had worked for over 2 decades, might have continued working if Rayna hadn't bought the property and refused to be intimidated. As afternoon turned to evening, The first remains were brought up from the burial site. Carefully, respectfully, forensic teams documented everything. DNA samples would be taken, identities confirmed. The families would finally be returned to their relatives for proper burial. Raina watched from a distance, feeling the weight of what had been uncovered. 8 lives ended because of greed. 8 families destroyed, all for deposits of minerals that would have made the legitimate owners wealthy anyway. The waste of it was staggering. "You should rest," Agent Price said. "Approaching again, we'll be processing this scene for days. You don't need to witness all of it." But Raina shook her head. "I owe it to them to stay, to see this through. You've already seen it through. You found the truth when no one else would. Then I owe it to myself." Raina looked out over the property, at the evidence markers and the teams working carefully in the fading light. "This is my home now. I need to understand everything that happened here." The second excavation revealed what Sheriff Moss had feared most: his insurance policy, buried separately from the bodies, wrapped in multiple layers of waterproof material, was a collection that documented every aspect of the conspiracy. Photographs of the mining operation at various stages, financial records showing payments to Moss and other local officials, contracts with Vance's shell companies, and detailed notes about each victim, who they were, why they'd become problems, how they'd been eliminated. Moss had kept it all. Evidence of his crimes, but also evidence against everyone else involved. If they'd ever tried to betray him or cut him out, he could have destroyed them. Agent Price spread the documents across a table in the barn, which had been converted into a temporary command center. He documented everything: names, dates, amounts. "This is prosecutorial gold." Raina looked at the photographs. Marcus Torrance with his 2 boys fishing in the creek. Dennis and Violet Bishop working in their garden. Happy people living their lives unaware of what was coming. "There are more victims than we thought," Price continued. "According to these notes, the operation started in 1995. A geologist who'd been surveying the area for academic research discovered the deposits. He was the first to disappear, then a prospector in 2001. The couple in the old photo you found, they were next. In 2007, they'd inherited the property and started asking questions about why survey crews kept trespassing. And the Torrance and Bishop families in 2018, Raina finished. That's when Moss started keeping detailed records. Why? My guess. The operation was getting bigger, riskier. More people were involved. He wanted protection in case things went wrong. Price looked up. Which they did, thanks to you. Outside, forensic teams continued their careful work. 8 sets of remains had been recovered so far, all in various stages of decomposition consistent with the timeline Moss's notes provided. DNA testing would confirm identities, but the personal effects matched the missing persons reports. As night fell, temporary lights were set up around the excavation sites. The work would continue through the darkness. This was too important to delay. Raina finally left the property, accepting Agent Price's suggestion that she stay in a hotel until the investigation was complete. Deke drove her into town, both of them exhausted beyond words. "You did it," he said as they pulled into the hotel parking lot. "You solved a 20-year conspiracy. We did it. You, me, Roy, Pete, Tom, all of us. But you started it. You could have walked away after the first warning. Most people would have." Raina was quiet for a moment. "I've spent 8 years walking away from things. From my grief, from connections, from anything that might hurt me. This was the first time I decided to stay and fight. I couldn't let those families be forgotten." In her hotel room, she finally allowed herself to break down. The adrenaline that had sustained her for days drained away, leaving her shaking and tearful. She cried for the families who'd died, for the children who'd never grow up, for the waste and the greed and the cruelty of it all. But she also cried with relief. It was over. The truth was out. Justice would be served. She slept dreamlessly and woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. Her phone showed dozens of messages, from Tom Bradshaw, from Lily Chen, from relatives of the victims who'd learned what she'd done. One message stood out. From Marcus Torrance's brother: "Thank you for giving us closure. Thank you for not letting them be forgotten. The boys deserved better than an unmarked grave in the mountains. Now they'll come home. Raina returned to the ranch on the third day. The forensic teams had finished their primary work, though the property would remain an active investigation site for weeks. Agent Price met her at the entrance. "We've confirmed all 8 victims," she said. "DNA testing matched dental records and family samples. Everyone's been identified and their families notified. What happens now? The bodies will be released to the families for burial once we've completed the forensic analysis. The trials will take time. Conspiracy cases of this magnitude are complex. But with the evidence we have, including your recordings and Moss's insurance cash, conviction is virtually certain." They walked the property together. The excavation sites were being filled in, the land beginning to heal from the wounds of illegal mining. The barn still showed signs of FBI presence, but most of the agents had moved their operation elsewhere. "There's one more thing," Price said. "The trust situation. We've been working with lawyers to determine the proper disposition of the property." Raina's stomach tightened. "My purchase was invalid, wasn't it?" "Technically, yes. The property should never have been auctioned. But," Price smiled slightly, "the trust administrators have reviewed your case. What you did, how you brought justice for the families. They're prepared to offer you a legitimate purchase agreement, fair market value, with the mineral rights properly protected in trust as originally intended. I can stay if you want to. After everything that's happened here, I'd understand if you wanted to leave." Raina looked out over the valley. The mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human drama. The creek still flowed. The windmill, now repaired, turned smoothly in the breeze. "No," she said firmly. "This is my home. These families died protecting it. The least I can do is honor that by living here, by making sure what happened is never forgotten." "Then it's settled." Price extended her hand. "The trust will contact you with the details." As the agent drove away, Raina stood alone on her property, truly hers now, or soon would be. The ghosts had been laid to rest, the truth had been told, and for the first time in 8 years, she felt like she'd finally stopped running. 2 weeks after the arrests, Raina stood on the porch of the main house and watched the sun set over the valley. The property felt different now, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the land itself. The federal investigation had confirmed everything. Sheriff Wayne Moss, Richard Vance, and 6 others had been charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, theft, and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Moss had already accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against the others, though it wouldn't save him from spending the rest of his life in prison. The victims had all been identified. The Torrance family, Marcus, Julie, and their 2 sons, would be buried together in California, where Julie's family waited to receive them. Dennis and Violet Bishop would be laid to rest in the cemetery in Timber Falls, beside 3 generations of bishops who'd come before them. The earlier victims, the couple from 2007 and the prospector and geologist from decades past, would finally return to their own families. Raina had attended the memorial service held on the property the previous week. It had been a quiet affair, attended by extended family members who'd spent years wondering what had happened to their loved ones. They'd thanked her, some with tears, some with quiet handshakes, all with genuine gratitude. Marcus Torrance's brother had stood beside her at the cairn, now marked with a proper memorial stone. "My brother was stubborn," he'd said. "When he knew something was right, he wouldn't back down, even when it cost him everything." He'd looked at Raina. "You're cut from the same cloth. He would have liked you." The trust administrators had been as good as their word. The paperwork was being finalized, legitimate purchase at fair market value, with the mineral rights protected in conservation trust. The deposits would remain in the ground, preserved rather than exploited. The families who died protecting the land had achieved their goal, just not in the way they'd planned. Raina had decided what to do with the second house. After consulting with the Torrance and Bishop families, she would convert it into a small museum, a place where people could learn what had happened here, see photographs of the families who'd lived and died protecting this land. Not a monument to tragedy, but a testament to courage and the pursuit of justice. The main house was being restored slowly. Deke had taken on the project, working carefully to preserve what the families had left, while making it livable for Raina. The quilts had been cleaned and returned to the beds. The photographs, including the old one with scratched faces, now restored, hung on the walls. The house remembered, and Raina wanted to honor that. Lily Chen had become a regular visitor, bringing food and friendship. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in 8 years, Raina had a friend, someone who understood what she'd been through and didn't expect her to be anything other than herself. "You're staying, then?" Lily had said a few days ago. "Not a question. I'm staying. Good. This place needs someone like you. Someone who won't look away when things get difficult." The windmill turned smoothly now, its blades catching the last light of day. Deke had rebuilt the mechanism completely, replacing worn parts and oiling everything until it moved without sound. It no longer creaked its ominous warning. Instead, it stood as a guardian, watching over land that had seen too much suffering but was finally at peace. Raina had planted wildflowers at the memorial site. In spring, they would bloom, a living reminder of the families who'd walked this land before her. She'd also begun sketching plans for a proper garden, something that would honor Violet Bishop's love of growing things. Tom Bradshaw had written a series of articles about the case, carefully researched pieces that told the full story of greed, corruption, and the ordinary people who'd stood against it. The articles had been picked up by major newspapers across the country. Several book publishers had reached out, interested in a longer treatment of the story. Tom had suggested Raina write it herself. "It's your story," he'd said. "You lived it. You should tell it." She was considering it, not for fame or money, but because the families deserved to have their stories told properly, completely. They'd been more than victims. They'd been people with dreams and families and lives that mattered. As twilight deepened, Raina heard a truck approaching. Deke, right on time. They'd fallen into a comfortable routine. He'd come by in the evenings, and they'd work on the house together, or simply sit and watch the valley settle into darkness. He joined her on the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the thermos he always brought. "Found something today," he said, handing her a cup. "In the barn loft, tucked behind a beam." He pulled out a leather journal, worn and water-stained. Inside, Marcus Torrance's handwriting filled page after page. Not just the ledger of incidents. This was a diary of his time on the property, his hopes for his family, his dreams of building something lasting, his love for this land, and his determination to protect it for his sons. The final entry was dated the day before he died. "Tomorrow we meet with the people who've been threatening us. Dennis and I decided we can't run. This is our home. Whatever happens, we stand our ground. For our families. For the truth." Raina closed the journal carefully. He knew the risks. They all did. But they chose to fight anyway. Deke looked out over the darkening valley. "You honored that choice by finishing what they started." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. The ranch was quiet now, but it was the quiet of peace rather than secrets. The truth had been told. Justice had been served, and life, slowly but surely, was returning to land that had been held hostage by greed. Raina thought about her journey, from the woman who'd bought this property on a whim, seeking solitude, to someone who'd found purpose in seeking justice. She'd come here running from her past, from grief and loss. Instead, she'd found a reason to stop running. Fresh wildflowers appeared on the cairn the next morning. Deke's quiet tribute, she knew, but she added her own, a small bouquet of late-season blooms she'd picked from the meadow. Standing there, she spoke quietly to the families she'd never met, but felt she knew. "You can rest now. Your story's been told. Your families know what happened. And this land, the land you died protecting, it's safe. I'll make sure it stays that way." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and earth and the promise of seasons turning. Somewhere in the timber a bird called. The creek rushed over stones, worn smooth by centuries of water. Life continued, as it always did, resilient and enduring. Raina had found what she'd been searching for without knowing she was searching. Not just a home, but belonging. Not just land, but purpose. Not just survival, but a reason to live fully, to engage with the world rather than hiding from it. As she walked back toward the houses, both of them now glowing with warm light as evening came, she thought about the restored photograph hanging in her living room. The Torrance and Bishop families, faces no longer scratched away but visible and remembered. They smiled out from the frame, forever captured in a moment of happiness. She'd given them back their dignity, their stories, their place in history. In return, they'd given her something she hadn't had in 8 years, a home, a purpose, and the understanding that sometimes the things we run from are exactly what we need to turn and face. The ranch was hers now, legally and truly, but more than that, she belonged to it. She was part of its story, woven into its history alongside everyone who'd walked this land before her. The ghosts had been laid to rest, but their legacy remained, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, worth standing your ground to protect. Raina knew she'd never leave. This was where she was meant to be, where her own story of running had finally come to an end, and a new story of staying, of building, of honoring the past while embracing the future was just beginning. The mountains stood eternal in the gathering darkness. The windmill turned. The creek sang its ancient song. And in the house that had held too many secrets, lights burned warm and welcoming, promising peace at last.